Morning, good afternoon. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for joining us today. It's so nice to see such a lively crowd. One of my favorite parts of the Columbus Metro Club is seeing how people gather, how they connect with one another, and they're honestly the warmth that everyone exudes. So welcome to the Forum, a weekly program of the Columbus Metro Club where we cultivate conversations and connections that drive the Columbus region forward. The Forum brings together visionary leaders, so CEOs, members of Congress, college presidents, UN ambassadors, artists, and changemakers to examine issues that truly matter to Central Ohio, exchange diverse ideas and perspectives, and forge connections that really create a better Columbus. I'm Sophia Pfiffner. I'm the president and CEO of the Columbus Metro Club. And for those of you joining us by live stream, we're here at the Ellis and Italian Village. Thank you so much for participating in our conversation virtually. All right, so before we kick off, I have a few thank yous to folks. One being the Columbus City Council, CODA, Downtown Columbus Incorporated. Thank you so much for sponsoring today's conversation. We really appreciate your investment in our mission. Additionally, thank you to the presenting sponsors of our live stream, the Center for Human Kindness at the Columbus Foundation, and our live stream promotional partner is the Columbus Dispatch. We're also very thankful for the Ellis for giving us a space to gather and to connect. So to all of our partners who are bringing this event together every single week, and specifically this conversation, let's give them a round of applause. You know, one of the things that we think about as an organization that focuses on bringing people together is how are we connecting the community? Are we hosting conversations in a place that's accessible to folks? I love when I see people ride their bikes to a CMC conversation, or if they let me know that they utilize CODA for getting to our conversations, because we want to make sure that as our city grows, that we're also a region that's very connected. But Columbus isn't just growing, it's transforming. As our city accelerates towards 3 million residents by 2050, the real challenge isn't whether growth will happen, but how we shape it. How we shape it. In the next few years, our region will make choices that will define our workforce, transportation, and identity for decades. And if we plan wisely, which I know we absolutely will, Columbus can become a national model for equitable, future-ready growth. If we don't, the consequences will be far harder and costlier to fix later. To introduce today's panel, please welcome to the podium Columbus City Council President Shannon Hardin.
This is such a good topic that when I heard about it, I was like, oh, I get to speak at the panel. And they're like, no, you just get to introduce them. No, this is an amazing panel with amazing folks. So thank you all for being here, and thank you to the CMC for continuing to bring us together to have the real, the tough, the exciting conversations that help move our city forward. Let's be honest, Columbus isn't just growing, we're becoming something bigger, something bolder. And in the next 25 years, over 3 million people, as Sophia said, will be coming to call this community home. That means that we'll have more energy, more culture, more jobs, and more people contributing to our neighborhoods and our economy. But that kind of growth doesn't happen to us. It must happen with us, and it must include all of us. We have a chance to define what kind of big city we want to be, a city that plans smarter, that builds better, that connects faster, and most importantly, that includes everyone. Today's conversation is a big one. How do we build a future-ready workforce? How do we scale transportation to meet that demand? And how do we ensure our diversity is a strength, not just a talking point? We've got an incredible lineup to dig into these questions. My good friend and colleague, Council President Rob Dorrance, Council President Pro Tem Rob Dorrance, my friend CODA CEO Monica Tejas-Fowler, and our community truth teller, United Way's Michael Wilkos. And a special treat, this conversation will be moderated by the Dispatch's own Jordan Layard. So let's lean in, because this moment, this growth isn't something to fear, it's something to lead. And I believe Columbus can set the example for how a city grows boldly and with inclusivity. So let's welcome this great panel, and let's get started.
Thanks for having me. This is my first time doing this. Michael, I wonder if you could go over some numbers for us and level set. What are the projections and the chances they come true?
All right, so I do love numbers. I have to say, though, that it is a real honor to be here on this panel today and talking about the future of Columbus. I did not grow up here. I grew up in Youngstown, and as a little kid, there's always a lot of people in the room from Youngstown, right? That's because there's not many people left in Youngstown. But as a kid, I was fascinated by the growth of the city. In 1980, I got the Ohio Almanac as a Christmas gift as a little kid. And there was just one place in the state of Ohio that was growing, and it was here. And so as a kid who I thought I was going to be an architect, I thought I was going to study economics, ultimately studying geography and urban planning, I knew that Columbus had a very robust future, so much so that I wanted to write an article in my high school newspaper telling everybody as soon as you graduate, you got to move to Columbus. And there apparently was not such a demand for such article in a school newspaper, and so I was blocked. And undeterred, I took an ad out in my high school newspaper in 1985, and it was called Discover Columbus and Capture the Spirit. So I've been studying this for a long time. So let's put some numbers into perspective. Between 2010 and 2020, we had significant population growth. In fact, we were about 70% of the state's population growth. That is just in Franklin County, I should say. If you look at the period from 2010 to 2024, we have added 323,000 people, while the rest of the state has added just 20,000. In the last 4 years, and there's this pre-COVID, after COVID that I want to put into perspective. Because what happened during COVID was people moved out of big cities, and Columbus was not immune to that pattern. It didn't happen as dramatic here, but as I said, Franklin County was 70% of the growth. During COVID, we shrank to 37% of growth, and last year we were back to 57% of regional growth. Put that in perspective by numbers, we added 16,000 people every 12 months for a decade, which means we needed to literally build the city of Worthington every 12 months from 2010 to 2020. Last year, Franklin County added 17,400 people in just a year, meaning the population growth is now exceeding the pre-COVID era. But the components of that growth dramatically shifted. If you look at that decennial census again, 2010 to 2020, half of our growth was simply we had more babies than people passed away. We have a very young median age in Central Ohio, which means we will grow regardless of economic conditions. The next largest share of our growth at 26% was international arrivals. And the smallest part of our growth was actually American-born people moving here from somewhere else, and that was a very clear pattern. They came from Cleveland, Dayton, Akron, Detroit, and Youngstown, essentially nearby cities that were not doing as well. And by a show of hands, how many of you in the room are from somewhere else in Ohio? Raise your hand. Well, there you see, right? What happened after 2020 was a real shift. We are now a metropolitan region that is losing American-born residents for the first time in history. We've actually lost 3,000 American-born residents. And while the state of Ohio has added 83,000 people in 4 years, we've added 87,000. So what I say is, we are the economic engine of this state, and really about a 25-mile radius of Broad and High is what's really driving the state's economy, in my opinion. So we're losing American-born. Births minus deaths have shrunk to 29% of our growth. And we are now 71% of our growth is the arrival of people from other countries. That is huge. That is a significant change, and that is the largest percentage of regional growth that has ever been attributed to international immigration. My concern for the economy and our ability to not just produce jobs, but fill them, is what if that flow of people to Central Ohio stops or reverses itself? It could put the skids on the regional economy pretty quickly. So where that goes in the future, we're not, if I could be 100% able to predict the future, I'd probably be writing books. But international immigration is something we should really be focused on. And then the other thing would be is, where is that growth going to occur? Is it going to be eating up farmland on the urban periphery, or will it continue to move inward, which is what we've seen? Why is growth moved inward? Because the demographics of our households has shifted. Young people need renter housing. That's not Union, Delaware looking Fairfield counties. Senior citizens no longer want big homes on large lots. That's what's zoned in Union, Delaware, Licking, and Fairfield counties. And new Americans want to be near job centers. And that's why you're seeing an explosion of growth in Northland, in Whitehall. Whitehall is now growing for the first time in 50 years. And to put in perspective, just one Columbus neighborhood of Northland, that neighborhood over 10 years added only 484 housing units, but 13,671 people moved into just that one Columbus neighborhood. Sometimes we can see change. We can see mid-rises going up in urban neighborhoods. We can see farm fields that are becoming housing, but sometimes there's growth and change that is undetectable to the naked eye. So that's a quick snapshot of where we are.
Thank you, Michael. I want to stay, that was very impressive. I want to stay on one point you brought up. You anticipated some of my questions. Could Columbus growth stall if the federal government continues to restrict foreign immigration?
Well, certainly based on the numbers, you can make your own conclusion as to where that would go. I see Lisa Pat McDaniel is shaking her head with great affirmation with that. But also keep in mind, Columbus is not always the first destination for new Americans that come to the United States. We tend to be a place that people come to once they've come to an east or west coast. Think of the first tier cities that have long been destination for international arrivals, meaning New York, Miami, Los Angeles, Chicago. We are considered a second tier emerging market. Who are the second tier cities? Columbus, Charlotte, Austin, Denver, Indianapolis. Generally speaking, when an emerging market that's second tier, meaning an inland city, starts to see an international immigration wave, you tend to see that come from a single continent of origin. Our demographic profile looks much more like a highly developed immigrant destination that's driven by the companies that are here, that's driven by the Ohio State University, and we've been producing about 15,000 net jobs to the metropolitan region every year for the last decade. New Americans and immigrants are not going to go to Youngstown and Cleveland and Dayton simply because there's not the job opportunities there for them. So I would be concerned in the long term, but in the short term, I do believe that Columbus, because it's still relatively reasonable housing market, is producing a lot of jobs. People will leave more expensive, larger cities and make their way to Columbus because they see it as a place of prosperity. But long term, that could be in jeopardy.
Let's start with Rob on this one. What are the benefits of preparing for our anticipated growth, or alternatively, the consequences that could arise if we don't prepare?
Yeah, and it's quite something to follow up with Michael, who's, I thought I was a nerd about local government when you talked about it. I did not get a 1980s almanac for Christmas, so that's a whole new level of nerddom that we all in the room can aspire to. Well, I think when we look at the problematic examples of what not being prepared for growth looks like, some of that is being felt in Columbus right now. So, but not to the same degree that other cities that have not been thoughtful about this in the past. When we think about rising costs for housing, when we think about the translation of the rising cost of transit for folks that don't have the stability of that kind of network within their neighborhood, as we're changing with my good friend here with Link Us. And I think when we talk about what that preparation looks like, It is making sure that you're not just responding to sort of one-offs, right? I think when we think about this from a workforce development sphere, and I know Michael referenced Lisa Papp-McDaniel from Aspire who's here, she's had a long career in this where oftentimes at a state and local level, we're constantly chasing that next project, that next investment, that next big announcement, right? And some of those things come to fruition, but oftentimes what we really need to do is think about the whole ecosystem from the beginning, right? So how do we make sure that from making sure that we're investing adequate resources in pre-K, literally all the way up to things like Columbus Promise, so that we have young folks that are connected to education opportunities right away, high quality education to make sure that they're prepared, that they can thrive economically and have access to this growth that provides career opportunities for folks. So when we think about what is not preparing for that growth means, it means when we talk about growing with equity, trying to grow better. This is something that the council president talks a lot about. This is something that the council generally talks a lot about is we're going to grow. How do we have the opportunity to do this better? It's in a way in which we're thinking about more thoughtfully around what are the wages that come with that kind of growth? What are the healthcare? What is the retirement benefits that this economic activity produces for folks? How do we make sure that the folks want to organize the workplace that they can do so in a meaningful way? Those are the kinds of things in which we have an opportunity to really be proactive on this because we know this growth is coming. And I think we're sort of in this era right now in Columbus in which we've been talking about growth for a really long time. And I think a lot of those different initiatives and planning are sort of coming to fruition. The joke I like to make, we're sort of this like planning to plan kind of community, right? We've got another blue ribbon commission for this or that. But a lot of the things are coming to fruition right now, right? When we talk about Link Us, when we talk about Zone In, when we talk about things like the bike plan, when we think about all these different things that community members are doing, all these big institutions that have strategic plans that are all actually lining up right now. And it's sort of the perfect time for all these things to come together because we need everyone in the same boat, rowing in the same direction. We talk about housing, right? So when Michael's talking about the growth of, say, the suburban communities like Whitehall, we talk a lot about the growth of Columbus and the needing for us to bring more housing online and stabilize the housing market and what that means in a growing community, which can mean higher prices. But that also means that we need suburban communities also to get in that boat with us and row in the same direction. That also means when Monica talks about implementing Link Us, we talk a lot about Columbus, but their footprint is county-wide and actually goes into other counties. How do we make sure that we're bringing everyone who actually understands that now is literally the time to take what that planning to plan has been for almost a half a generation of leaders in our community and actually start to implement those things to make sure that we have this chance to get ahead of this, to make sure that families in Columbus can have a roof over their heads that they can afford, have a career that again comes with those needed health care and retirement benefits, and ultimately has the ability to thrive in this community.
I will add, I think one of the things that the council did, along with Morpsey and other partners, is really kind of take the time to talk to other communities that were seeing the growth, maybe at a different pace, but they saw that growth, and there was hesitation. And there was hesitation on, when do we invest in transportation? When do we invest in more housing? When do we invest in kind of creating those walkable communities? And when you talk to those communities, their advice is always start now. It's one of those things where you cannot play catch up with some of this infrastructure. It's important to begin when you start to see that. And so I'm really excited to be in a community where they have seen that coming. They started that work before I came, and happy to carry that baton some of the way.
I want to just add a little bit to my excitement around Link Us. The idea to build Interstate 270 was written in a 1953 report called the Bergdorf Study. So really the last time we had a truly innovative transportation idea was about 72 years ago, if I did my math right. So construction started in 1962. Interstate 270 opened in 1975. The Columbus Dispatch editorial board wrote a Sunday column about 270 when it opened, and it was called The Highway to Nowhere. Why would you get on a highway and 55 minutes later, you just end up where you started, right? Dublin had 3,000 people. We didn't vote on it. but it irrevocably reshaped the urban geography of our region. It also happened that during that period, when construction started in 1962, what else was going on? Oh, these pesky things like redlining and restrictive covenants and urban renewal, and then highway building through urban neighborhoods, busing. It just pulled the life out of so many of our urban neighborhoods. We ended those policies, but Columbus, nor any American city, ever did restorative justice. And that investment and that story is still playing out. So now we had the very first opportunity, in my opinion, to do transportation restorative justice, and that was called Link Us. And not only did it pass, it was a big ask, and it passed by a huge margin of victory, including Beltway suburbs voted for the transit levy for the first time ever. Because what I think is happening is this notion of economic self-sufficiency on the urban periphery is no longer a sufficient defense for your isolationism. Cities and regions will rise or fall together. And that's what I think is shifting in Central Ohio. It has shifted in the economic development game. It has yet to fully shift in the housing space.
Let's stay on Link Us for just a moment. For those of you who don't know, but I'm pretty sure this room knows, there was a sales tax increase that passed to fund this plan called Link Us that is supposed to modernize our transit system. Monica, can you talk to us about how Link Us plays into getting all these new people around? And can you give us an update on Link Us since the levy passed?
I would love to give you an update on Link Us. So for everyone, just kind of a refresher, what was Link Us? You know, when we came out, it's more CODA, more sidewalks, and more opportunity. So what do we mean by that? Well, more CODA is pretty simple. We are talking about 45% more service, CODA service, and that was something that I think resonated with people. People weren't like, oh, I want this new fancy thing, you know, it's great we're doing BRT, but they just need more service. So some of it's as simple as frequency and service hours. And I'm just gonna put a plug in here because as an update, we extended our service to midnight lineup. That means our service ends about 1:30, 2 o'clock in the morning now. Our ridership May over May is 17% increase. Just that 1 month. So as of May 5th, we put that in place. That's the need. That is the need. That's a very clear for us. We needed to put that out there. They've been waiting for it. Year over year, we've seen 8.5% from 2024 year to date to 2025. So we know we're headed in the right direction. So more CODA service, frequency, yes, expanded hours, also those minimally 5 BRT corridors, and I like to say minimally because I like to challenge my team. They're going to start sweating soon. But I think, you know,
BRT stands
Bus Rapid Transit. So Bus Rapid Transit is light rail on wheels. That's plain and simple what it is. We have dedicated guideways. We have level platform boarding. So you're getting on a bus that feels like you're getting on a railroad, like a light rail. You're just rolling right on with your bike or stroller or walking right on. All fare payment happens off board. You're not interacting with the bus operator. It's quick, it's easy. Our dedicated guideway means that we have our own bus lane. The bus operates in that and only that, so that hopefully you're on the bus watching those cars sit in traffic while we roll on by. That's the goal here. And so adding that frequency will really kind of like change how we move in our region. The other things that we're adding are, when I say more sidewalks, it's 500 plus miles of new sidewalks, protected bike paths, and trails. And so what does CODA have to do with sidewalks or trails or this stuff? It's very simple. It's about connecting communities. So when those communities are connected, then they then have access to CODA. We have now opened it up to so many more people because we can go out there, folks, and put a bus stop anywhere. But if people cannot get to that bus stop safely, it is not doing what it's intended to do. So this is a huge part, and it's a big need. The last piece that, you know, I said is more opportunity, and that's quite simple. Giving people an opportunity to choose how they spend their money rather than forcing them into a vehicle, forcing them into car payments, insurance. Some of this is what leaves so many individuals on that line of from paycheck to paycheck. They're not sure if they're going to be able to make it. And so if we want to talk about prosperity in this region, we have to be able to allow people to make choices on how they move in this region. So I gave you a quick little update on our ridership. So we're at 90% design on West Broad. That will be the first corridor that will open. We are at 60% on East Main, and then we are at 30% on the Northwest corridor, or approaching 30% on the Northwest corridor. Those are the first 3 identified bus rapid transit corridors. The other 2 have not yet been identified. They're starting work on that, and when we get through that, it will be a very public process, as the first 3 were, so that everyone knows where it's going, what's coming. And then, you know, as I mentioned, we've already increased to midnight, but prior to that, we added some new lines, some new frequencies. So a lot of our frequencies, we're trying to do away with anything that is 60 minutes. 60 minutes is just, if you miss that bus, you can't wait for the next bus. You're basically, I have to go find something else. So increasing frequency has been something that we've been working on significantly. Also extending some of our lines where we know we can gather more ridership or give people access to grocery stores, those kinds of things. We've been doing that. So you'll see that in Easton, kind of that route. You'll see some of those extensions there. But yeah, we've been busy, and we're seeing it in ridership. People are noticing.
If I can add one small compliment to Monica and her team. The Transportation Workers Union had a historic contract with CODA last year. CODA needs more folks to come to work for it in order to expand its footprint, and CODA stepped up to make sure that this is an attractive place to work and to make a career at. Because again, when you talk about increasing frequency, that means more folks literally driving the bus. That means more folks literally fixing the bus. That means more folks maintaining all of those things. And absent CODA stepping up and doing their part as to be an employer of choice in this community, which I think is a hell of a thing to compliment them on, they would not be able to implement Link Us in the way that they're going to be able to moving forward.
Let's stay on workforce for just a moment. So big investments and more jobs are coming to the region. How do we make sure we have the skilled workforce here?
Well, I see Bill Lafayette in the back staring at me right now, and I'm going to reference his report. If you were in the room early in the year for his annual report, I think one thing that stands out to me when we think about workforce generally is sort of the mix match that exists out there, right? The way that we train workers in this community compared to the actual career opportunities that are out there oftentimes are not connected to one another. So when I mentioned earlier about the ability to have a much more of a holistic focus about what does growth look like, when you really drill down to things like workforce, is actually making sure that industry needs match what actually we're investing in workforce in our community. And when we think about it at a time in our country in which so many workforce funds have flowed down from the federal government to the county and other entities to provide that kind of workforce training, we are going to be in an era in which there's probably going to be fewer dollars to do those kinds of things that we're going to have to stretch further. So one of the things is actually to really focus ourselves on what does the future of workforce look like here in Columbus and in Central Ohio. And when we think about not having a trained workforce is actually one of the biggest drags on our economy here in Columbus and certainly in Central Ohio. It's about actually trying to match those industries together. And And that is something that sometimes you can respond to, and you do have large economic development announcements, but it's also just creating that ecosystem in which, again, we're investing all the way from pre-K all the way up to being able to make sure that folks can get a higher ed degree if that's something that they want to pursue. But again, I think it's making sure that we have the opportunity to identify those key growth industries. When you look at whether or not it's the Bureau of Labor Statistics or Bill's report, it's no secret the industries in Columbus that are growing. And I think when we talk about trying to match those things with those workforce dollars, I think really matters. One of the things that I've been really excited to work with, again, with the Workforce Development Board, now Aspire, we're going to use that new name, is a program that City Council partnered with them on called Career 500. And this is a program in which we're trying to take 500 workers over the next 2 years and significantly improve their economic outcomes, in which we're seeing double-digit wage increases. And I think that is something that's great and laudable, and we all like that. But I think one of the reasons that I'm so excited about that is we went one step further, and we actually brought Ohio State on as a partner to actually evaluate the programs themselves during the life of the program. Because we all talk about right now, one of the things when we talk about workforce is that while our unemployment rate has ticked up over the last year, it's still historically low. So when we think about actually getting folks into the workforce and keeping them in jobs that, again, pay a living wage, come with health care, come with retirement, is about how do we keep them there? And oftentimes families are one child care emergency away from not being able to make it to work. They're one transit emergency away from not being able to make it to work, right? And the downstream effects that has on that family. So I think one of the really exciting things the last 5 or 10 years in the workforce sphere has been a recognition that we need to invest in wraparound service to make sure that we're supporting not just the individual that's getting the training, but holistically that family, right? And that is something that really matters because, again, that job is more than just that one thing for that individual. It's supporting a whole family if we're doing this right. So there's been a lot of efforts on, again, providing more robust wraparound services. But here in Columbus, we've actually never sat down and actually studied, well, which one of those actually move the needle? I think we know a lot of them that are helpful, but what are actually the actual interventions that actually are more likely to get someone in a career and keep them there? And that is something I'm very, very excited in that program for the first time. We're actually going to take a step back and say, here in Columbus, Ohio, what moves the needle on getting someone in the workforce, and more importantly, what keeps them there? And I think over the next couple of years, as that program continues, we're really going to be able to identify that so that when we then say, whether it's Franklin County or the City of Columbus or our nonprofit partners and say, we want to do X, Y, and Z when it comes to workforce, okay, but let's make sure we actually also invest in the things that we know is important holistically to that family to make sure they can stay in the workforce.
Mike, were you trying to chime in?
Yeah, because I like numbers. So Columbus is doing really well. I mean, the growth of our region is omnipresent, and when people visit Columbus from other parts of the state, it is the one thing that they want to talk about because it is so clear to them. And yet, when you look at what is the percentage of our population that's either in poverty or what we're going to refer to as the working poor, a new term that United Way Worldwide uses is called ALICE. Think of the TV show Alice, who is working at a Mel's Diner, recently passed away, Linda Lavin. But ALICE stands for Asset Limited Income Constrained Employed. It's people who are working full-time or multiple jobs but can't make ends meet. Over the last 50 years, the poverty rate in this community has had a low of 10.5 and a high of 18.2%. We're at 13 right now. So we're in a relatively good period, but there's another 25% of the workforce that is ALICE. They don't make enough to pay housing costs, medical care, child care, utilities. If you are a two-parent household with 2 children, the federal poverty rate is $30,000 for that family of 4. If you want to make it in Franklin County as a family of 4, you need to make $45 an hour or $90,000 a year to make it based on housing, transportation, medical care. And so despite the fact that Franklin County has a 70% labor force participation rate compared to 63.5 for the state, we have incomes that are $4,000 a year higher than the state average. We have 41% of us that hold a college degree. That is outstanding, and yet 38% of our population in this region struggles compared to 39% for the state. We look just like Akron and Dayton and Canton. So what's going on with that? And the issue is we've got too many jobs that just don't pay enough to make it. So now we have this growth opportunity. If the percentage of people who are poor and working poor just stays the same in this good time, and we had 750,000 additional people, we have 285,000 more low-income people coming. If we had 1 million, we got 350,000 low-income people coming. And I say to people all the time, take out a map and tell me where you want to put 300,000 people who are economically struggling. I can tell you where they're not going to go. They're not going to go to any neighborhood near downtown Columbus. Poverty is moving away from the center of the city like wildfire. It is moving east along Broad, Livingston, and Maine. It is exiting the Near East Side. It's leaped over Bexley and Berwick, and it's running right through Whitehall into Reynoldsburg. Poverty's moving up Cleveland Avenue and Westerville Road, and it's right up into the Westerville School District. And it is moving along West Broad and Sullivan. It's all these neighborhoods built in the 1960s and 1970s, which aren't old enough to be interesting, and they're not new enough to be competitive. But they can't absorb another 300,000 low-income people. And as I pontificate about my city of Columbus, I say, who made the decision that the city of Columbus had the economic and moral responsibility to house the region's workforce? Growth comes with a soft white underbelly, and that is not enough people in this region are able to take access to that growth and prosperity, and that's the number one thing I wish for Columbus's future.
I'm going to have one more question on housing. Thank you, Michael. But it is CMC's longstanding tradition to take audience questions. We'll move to questions from our live stream and in-person audiences in just a few minutes. If you have a question, please make your way over to the microphone now. If you're joining us on YouTube, please type your questions into the chat. But before we take audience questions, I want to stay on that point about housing that Michael started to get us onto. Where are all these people going to live? And are we building enough housing for them?
We're not building it yet. We're doing our hardest. I mean, I think, again, when we think about where are folks going to live, it's going to be everywhere. And I think when we talk about what does housing look like, and I think Michael touched on this earlier, when we talk about what does development patterns look like in prior generations to what they'll look like today, I mean, this is one of the reasons why you have to densify portions of the city and portions of the region. You must actually put our land to better use when we think about how do we create more housing units across the city. When we talked about the first phase of first phase of Zone In passing about a year ago at Columbus City Council, we talked a lot about housing when we talked about modernizing our zoning code, right? Because literally when we talk about what does land use restrictions means, that means a restriction on the ability to produce more housing units. And we're now starting the second phase of Zone In that's going to touch nearly half of the city. And this is where we talk about things lining up at the same time. This is also happening when we have a $500 million affordable housing bond package on the ballot this fall. When we talk about, and I see Lark Mallory staring at me, nodding her head right now, about we've got more people right now in this space thinking thoughtfully around how do you leverage both local, state, and federal investment, and also private investment in creating this housing. We have a job to do when on the government side of reducing red tape and regulatory burdens and actually bringing investment. But we have, I think, a tremendous amount of really engaged folks across this community right now that are intensely focused on this topic. All the way from the big stuff down to the Councilmember Beatty who's sitting in front of me right now. I think he's got a hearing tomorrow on how do we reduce red tape on bringing about accessory dwelling units or carriage houses in Columbus. Because we need to create all kinds of housing. And our code here in Columbus has been extremely restrictive during the last 50 plus years. We're taking some of those restrictions down. Fortunately, we've had some suburban communities that have followed us. I would invite others to do the same. When Michael talks about where poverty is moving, this housing crisis, no one is immune from it. And when we think about our moral responsibility to our residents, it is about making sure that we, as policymakers and as community leaders, have figured out ways to break those barriers down to bring more housing online and do it as quickly as possible. Because again, when we talk about the first question you asked about the consequences of growth, if you don't plan for it, it is $400,000, $500,000, $600,000, $800,000 starter homes. And I don't know about you all, but that's not something that I could afford literally right now, or when I was looking for my first house. Right? And that is when you're going to literally price yourself out of success. When we talk about the amount of jobs that are being created in Columbus right now, those are not matching the amount of housing units that are being created. So this is something that we need to get our arms around, and it's both a regulatory space, it's an investment space, but it's thought leadership from folks saying, we know what the housing crisis means and the results of that for families in Columbus. And, chairing the zoning committee, it's rather interesting right now because we have this zoning modernization effort in which we have many folks that have linked arms together and say, this is something that our community needs to do and needs to change the way that we've done this regulation in the past about these, reforms in the future. While also at the same time, we still have the old zoning code for the other, 95% of the city. And almost every single week we'll have someone coming down and saying, we can't build this here. Think about the traffic. Think about the crime. Think about this. Think about that. And I say, I think about the family that can't afford to have a roof over their head. And that is, that's my responsibility. So I think when we talk about housing, it's sort of everyone on deck right now. And we are seeing the returns on some of these early modernization on the zoning code, but also I see folks that are really thinking through how to use these bond dollars and other investments in a thoughtful way.
Thank you, panelists. I see a line forming behind Doug Buchanan, who is also curating questions from our live stream audience. Doug, what is our first question?
Jordan, thank you very much, and thank you so much to today's panelists for a great conversation. If you have a question, please do join us here. We'll try to get to as many questions as we can before we run out of time today. Great questions at CMC always have two things in common, don't they? They can be asked in just a couple of seconds, a sentence or two, and what punctuation mark does a question end with? It ends with a question mark. They do, don't they? Yes.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I'm Kathy Fox with Community Strategy Partners. We've been reading and hearing in the news that Intel is looking at downsizing its business overall in computer chips, that there are other manufacturers who are bigger in that space. And I would like to hear from each of you about what our region should be doing if the planned Intel development doesn't come to fruition at the scale that was originally planned. Thank you.
Columbus is growing whether we have Intel or not. As I said earlier, on average, we've been adding about 15,000 jobs to the metropolitan region. And so as much as there was incredible fanfare, and I on a personal level am hopeful that whoever and whatever that site in Licking County becomes, that there'll be a huge economic development benefit from that. I do want to put some things into perspective, though, about the housing market and growth. As recently as 2010, we had 107 housing units for every 100 households, meaning we had a pretty good housing market, giving you, the consumer, relatively good option of price, tenure, location. By 2020, that came down to just 102 housing units for every 100 households. What I think happened in that decade was just take the order of affordable housing, which was this thing for someone else I don't really understand, that's kind of over there and it's got income guidelines. Reverse the order of affordable housing to housing affordability, and now you've got the teacher and the firefighter who are struggling to find housing in Central Ohio. If we don't change our attitudes around housing relative to economic development, we will be on track to have just 96 housing units for every 100 households by the end of the decade. It's gonna get real rough real fast. We have a tight market, but we don't have a crisis. we are heading in the same direction of every rapidly growing West Coast city has faced over the last 30 years, and that is job creation and housing construction are simply out of whack. So whether or not Intel produces 3,000 or 12,000 jobs and has 4,000 or 40,000 spinoff jobs, we need to start delivering one housing unit for every one job that we create so we can dig ourselves out of this hole, whether it's Intel or not.
I'll just add, with regard to Intel specifically, CODA works very closely with the surrounding counties that we kind of provide service within. So we actually work really closely with Licking counties. What I would say is, the growth is happening regardless, and so Intel is not the driver of what needs to happen when we talk about connecting transit. So our conversation with Licking County is always in the future regional connection. How are we going to connect there? Because if it's Intel, if it's something else, we will need to be there. We will need to be able to connect people from Licking County into Franklin County and vice versa. People do not see boundaries in terms of jurisdictions. They just know, I got my job over there, I need to get there, and that's our role.
The only thing I'd add is I think what is going on at Intel is an excellent, I think, response to one of the things I mentioned earlier, just about we can't just be chasing, shiny things constantly when we talk about workforce. We need to invest in resilient career pipelines that have a lot of different places and employers that those skills can match versus chasing one individual announcement or one individual employer. Again, to I think both my panelists' points, whether or not that is 3,000 workers or 12,000, certainly there should be a workforce plan, and many folks have been working on how to make sure that folks in this community can take advantage of those career opportunities. But any individual announcement is never going to be the one all be all to invest in workforce, and I think that's. I would not want folks to sort of lean in, too hard with any individual type of, announcement, economic development plan, et cetera, because again, one of the things that I think one of the reasons why Columbus's economy for decades has been so resilient is because of the diversity of the economy. Unlike when you talk about places like Youngstown or where I grew up near Toledo, go Rockets. When you have, your economy structured around just one or two industries, a disruption in that industry can be so toxic for the overall economy. I think that has historically been one of the strengths of Columbus and Central Ohio, is that you have had diversity within the larger and medium employers within Columbus. And that I think helps us to see that, again, when we're investing in people, we should be thoughtful around what does that diversity of skills look like, rather than just focus on one individual employer.
Hi, my name is Tony Bell. I serve as the board chair for Columbus Landmarks Foundation. We believe in, preservation, architectural history. As we address the housing affordability and the changing landscape of Columbus, how are you seeing preservation, right? Each community being able to continue to tell its story. How are you seeing that being woven into the fabric of this development?
Yeah, I think, if you've been in Columbus long enough, you know some of our poor history of preserving the history that we've had in Columbus, whether or not it's Union Station or other things within our community. We've often have not been good stewards of the long-term history that has existed here. And I think that is sometimes due to choices that were made on sort of how we were going to encourage or discourage development. I think at a time in which we know that both the city, county, and everyone else wants to encourage more development as it relates to housing, it begs the question of how do you encourage and put some guardrails around historical preservation in that process. I think while we have what I would say is a very sort of scattershot approach to that at the city level, because we have certain areas of the city have historic commissions, they have architectural review and preservation, while others don't. And I think to Michael's point, I think when you look at some of the areas of Columbus that have that type of preservation requirements in place, those are folks that have had more resources and more time to advocate, and certainly are not in areas of the city that we were very, very easy to bulldoze, literally for the construction of highways in Columbus, right? So I think it begs the question. I think this is something that certainly came up, I think, a lot last year during the first phase of zone-in of what is the city's approach to historical preservation. It's something that I think the city needs to take a hard look at a time in which we are encouraging more development. How do we place, I think, reasonable guardrails around preserving history, while at the same time making sure we have a key focus on producing more housing in Columbus. Those things do not need to be in conflict with one another. I'm not sure the best way for us to do that right now, but I know we got a lot of smart folks, particularly Columbus Landmarks has advocated strongly on this in the past, and I think it's something that we're going to take a hard look at in the near future.
What I'll add to that is if you don't build cities worthy of human affection, you won't have cities that people care about. And with not having water, mountains, or sunshine half the year, we really need to have a built environment that is worthy of human affection. If you walk from Nordstrom to Crate and Barrel at Easton, it is the same distance as walking from Staten High to Nationwide and High. But how often do you walk from Staten High to Nationwide and High? Are you rewarded in the same way as you're rewarded for walking through Easton? And what did Easton do? It provided not just a retail and entertainment destination, but it wants you to feel nostalgic about place, and so you will linger there longer. And so what I think the real challenge for our region will be when Hilliard-Rome Road starts to weather and become torn and tattered, are you going to organize to save the closed Wendy's, Arby's, and Taco Bell? Or are you going to fight to save neighborhoods where people have an emotional connection? And that is why, to Tony's question, the built environment should be especially something we pay attention to, because we lack some of those natural amenities that people have affection for.
So I'm Carly. My question is, why is growth good? There are some people in our community who will say, for instance, we don't have a housing shortage, we have a people surplus. Why is that anti-growth approach or perspective wrong, in your opinion?
Looking at me. I discredit that. I mean, cities either rise or fall, they don't stay the same. And so the question will be is, you will manage something. Do you want to manage decline, or do you want to manage growth? I'd far much rather manage growth because it's exciting. The question will become is, are we managing it well, and are as many people as possible able to participate in that growth? Growth provides opportunity, decline does not. And so I just immediately will dispel that notion. It is a logical conclusion of what you just said. I certainly hear it a lot in community meetings. I've actually gone to community meetings where people have said, we don't need more housing in Columbus, we need less housing because all the housing getting built is too expensive for us, right? There's a lot of illogical thoughts out there, and we just need to confront them.
I'll point to some European cities who have seen the opposite of growth and essentially end up with dilapidated buildings, homes, basically dying cities. They are paying people to move there. They are trying everything possible to attract young people there. So, I think about just individually, if you're not growing, what are you doing? And I think that works very much for a city as well. It's a living, breathing thing that needs to grow.
To build on both those comments, I think to underline, when you think about what growth can mean, that can mean the opportunity for a family for the first time in its history to actually gain economic stability. That's what it means. Now, again, there's lots of challenges with that growth when we talk about housing costs, transit, all the kinds of things that go into that. But fundamentally, it is easier to move a family from economic insecurity to security when you have growth available, economic growth available within that community. So it is a question about, do you care about your fellow man or woman being able to actually have the things to make their family stable? If you do, certainly there are challenges with growth. But I would rather, again, as Michael said, deal with those things than say to my fellow human, good luck. And we have the opportunity to channel that growth. And I think when we think about the leadership across Central Ohio, one of the things that fills me with a tremendous amount of optimism is that folks really, I think, to their core, do believe that when you think about what growth is that this is the opportunity to do it better. When we talk about all these different things that are coming together literally in these moments in Columbus right now, it is a rare thing for that all to happen. And almost at the central part of all those things is thinking about how do we actually do this in a more equitable way, not in the way in which 1950s, 60s, 70s, or 80s, or 90s, in which growth just happens and we just let anyone take advantage of it, and anyone at the bottom end of the economic stratosphere we don't care about. I think when I look at entities like CODA or the United Way or Franklin County or my friends in the labor movement, it is all about channeling that growth to better families. And I think that's something that fills me with an incredible amount of optimism when we think about what Columbus is and what it can be.
I think Doug has one more question in the back. Nope, we're wrapping it up. Okay, he's giving me the wrap-up signal. So we'll turn it back over to Sophia for concluding remarks.
I don't know about you, but I feel incredibly energized by the possibility that's here in Central Ohio. Throughout today's conversation, I kept on coming back to a word that almost every single one of you mentioned: connection. Connection. And to me, that connection isn't possible without civic participation, civic engagement. But it's not, civic engagement isn't a spectator sport, right? Spectators watch change happen. Participants make change happen. And each one of you here today are participants. You are showing up to know what's going on in Central Ohio. And I know that when you get back to your next step, your home, your work, your walk with friends, with neighbors, that you're not just going to let this conversation live here, that you're going to take action. You're going to share today's discussion with a neighbor. You're going to talk about it within your workplace, right? You're going to show up again, but most importantly, you're going to stand up. Because each of you in this room, if you are here today, you're a participant that's going to make our future with 3 million more residents a possible reality that's going to transform not just our region, but our entire country. So I want to take a moment to thank our sponsors, Downtown Columbus Incorporated, the City of Columbus and CODA for sponsoring today's conversation. I want to thank our presenting sponsors for our live stream, the Center for Human Kindness at the Columbus Foundation, and our live stream promotional partnership with the Columbus Dispatch. Thank you so much for all of our live stream viewers for participating and engaging and asking questions. Thank you to the Ellis for hosting today's conversation, but most importantly, thank you to our panelists, Councilmember Rob Dorans, Monica Tellez-Fowler, Michael Wilkos, and our host, Jordan Laird. Thank you so much for being here today. Let's give them all a round of applause. But wait, there's more. There's always something happening at the CMC. So make sure that you make plans right now to join next week's conversation. Yes, we do this every single week. So next week, we are talking about a downtown that works and lives. So we'll be exploring the continued transformation of downtown Columbus. Thank you so much for joining us today, and we'll see you next week.